for people that registered but were unable to make it. One other piece of logistical information, if folks could rename themselves to their full name, that would be great, just so as we, you ask questions, we kind of know who's asking them and keep track of that. That'd be super helpful. And if you want to put in what your office is running for your name, that's great too. So I'll just go ahead and get this kicked off. First off, thank you so much for being here. My name is Zach Sheehan. I'm the project director for the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. We're a statewide advocacy organization, and I'm really excited to have Moms Rising here to join us. So I'm going to kick it over to them just for a general overview of who they are and what they do, and then we'll start with my presentation and go from there. So Mackenzie and Nancy, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Zach, for having us. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. We're so excited to get the chance to talk with you before you become candidates and we see you up in Concord this winter. But my name is Mackenzie Nicholson. I'm the Senior Director of Moms Rising in New Hampshire. We are going to talk a little bit more in depth about what Moms Rising is when it comes to our portion of the show this evening. So I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger and kick it over to Nancy for her quick intro.
Hey everyone, my name is Nancy Glenn and I'm a campaign director for Moms Rising here in New Hampshire. And I'm excited for tonight too, to be able to share a little bit more of what we do. And like Mackenzie said, we'll keep you on the cliff waiting for what we're going to say next.
Awesome, thank you. So one more piece of logistical information before I jump in. We will be doing Q&A at the very end. And so please, as you have questions, as I'm going, and as Mackenzie and Nancy are going, put them in the chat. And some members from our team will be grabbing them, putting them in a doc, organizing them, and then Casey will be moderating the Q&A at the end. So as you have questions, as things I'm saying, for both presentations, please put them in there so you don't forget. And then we'll do questions at the very end after we've both presented. All right, Casey, can I get a thumbs up if this looks good? Great. All right, so first off, again, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate all of you taking the time on this Tuesday evening. This is a second in a series of candidate education webinars that we're working on putting together with partner organizations, really just trying to help give information to candidates and non-candidates and potential candidates about some of the hot topics in New Hampshire, and really act as a resource for you all and for the community at large. So I know from the chat, I saw that we had a lot of candidates here from all over the state, which is very exciting. I know some of you are not candidates and are also happy to have you here as well. So a little bit about New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I've got a small team here based in Concord. And a lot of what we do is education around education funding and property taxes. And we kind of have three main pieces that I'll be walking through today. I do want to say at the outset that sometimes our presentations can get a little depressing, and that is something we've gotten some feedback on. So I want to start off by saying that our public education system in New Hampshire is great in a lot of ways. We rank really highly in a whole range of metrics. We have really good public schools, amazing teachers and administrators across the board, across the state, in every school district. And so, kind of walking forward about some of the issues with the funding mechanism, I don't want to take away from the fact that we do a really good job here educating our kids in our public school system. About 90% of students choose to attend public schools, and we do a lot of things really well. But that being said, the averages do hide some of the disparities that are seen in specific communities, in specific districts around the state, and that specific families or schools face. And so that's some of kind of what we dig into, but I do want to kind of ground that in the fact that we do a lot of really good things here in New Hampshire. And all of us here on the call today are here because we care about this state, and we're either running for office or we work in nonprofit organizations and really wanting to continue to make this place a good place to live and stay and raise kids and be part of a community. So the three main pieces that we're running through tonight are kind of looking at how we fund our schools, how it is unconstitutional, that both taxpayers and students are not treated equitably or fairly by the system, And then I'll kind of answer that question I think a lot of candidates are interested in is, how much do people care about this? And the answer is a lot, and we'll get into that a little more specifically. But to kind of kick that piece off, we did run a poll last fall, and when responding to the question, how important a priority are these issues to address for state government here in New Hampshire, 75% of the people responded saying funding for pre-K through 12th grade was a high priority. It was only behind jobs and the economy at 83%, which that's kind of hard to beat on any poll. So we're happy that funding for pre-K was for our public education system was that high, and I'll get a little more into that poll later in the presentation. So to start off with some of the constitutional pieces, some of you may have heard about the Claremont decisions from the 90s, and there was another Supreme Court decision, the Londonderry decision in the mid-2000s. But the kind of two big takeaways from those decisions were that the state of New Hampshire is obligated to pay for the cost of an adequate education for every public school student. And the other big piece is that the taxes used for that need to be uniform in rate across the state. And one thing I want to point out about the term adequate is that was not just the bare basics. There was a very future-oriented and expansive view of what public education should mean for our students. And the justices in the Supreme Court decision recognized that would change as as we move forward, as we started incorporating more technology into the classroom, as the the needs of the labor market and of our communities change throughout the years. And so that is not a static definition. That is a really expansive definition that was really insightful of them to include in that decision. And I want to highlight this piece, relative to the that needs to be equal in valuation and uniform in rate. And the reason is because there was, some of you might have heard of the Conval lawsuit that was filed about 3 years ago at this point, and is still ongoing. And there was another lawsuit filed at the end of June, really focusing in on this specific piece about how the taxes used to raise money for our public education system are far from equal in valuation or uniform in rate. I'll walk through some of why that is now. But this has become, kind of bumped up to become even more of a in the spotlight recently because of that added lawsuit. So there's now 2 pending lawsuits relative to education funding, both how much money the state gives and how those funds are raised. The big picture is that we rely on local property taxes for the lion's share of the revenue for our public school system. And so here you can see this is from the 2020-2021 school year. And you can see there's, it's a large portion of our state budget. $3.5 billion is a lot of money. I know I saw some members who have or currently serve on the finance committee, and they can tell you that this is a big part of the state budget. And if you add in on top of the local property tax, 61%, if you add in SWEPT, which while that's called the statewide education property tax, it is raised and retained locally, and the state never actually touches that money. And so it really truly is another local property tax. So, about 70 cents out of every dollar of revenue for school districts comes from local property taxes. And so it shouldn't be a huge surprise that we rely heavily on local property taxes. And as you can see, the reliance for schools specifically is one of the driving factors in that reliance. So this chart all the way on the left, you can see the property tax dwarfs every other tax we have in this state. And the local schools is that bottom darker blue piece. The municipal piece, you hear a lot about the downshifting of the retirement system. That adds into that municipal piece. There are a lot of other elements to that. But I just want to really highlight that as we talk about taxes, which in New Hampshire can be a scary and divisive topic for sure. But I just want to really highlight that we rely heavily on property taxes. And sometimes you'll hear in discourse at the State House, over the most recent budgets, the past few budget cycles, there've been a lot of conversations and publicity around our business taxes. You can see there that the BET and BPT, those are our two main business taxes here in the state. While they are a significant amount of money, they're dwarfed by our reliance on property taxes. And so part of, as an organization, what we are trying to do is really highlight how much we rely on those local property taxes and push that up as a more significant priority at the state level for state level lawmakers, especially during the budget process, which some of you, if you win your elections, will be engaged in starting in January next year. And it's, I just, sometimes people ask about other taxes or other different revenue, and many of them are just dwarfed by how much revenue we bring in from local property taxes. And so the other side of the coin here is how little money is provided by the state for our public education system. And so here you can see all the other states in the country, the amount of money that the state puts up as a share of their school revenue. And so you can see New Hampshire is all the way at the bottom. And even if you consider SWEPT as state revenue, which is technically not, we're still second from the bottom. And our neighbors in Vermont, provide 90% of the funding is from the state. It's kind of like they're the other end of the spectrum. And this dramatic kind of lack of funding from the state really has formed the foundation of both the Claremont lawsuits, the current Conval lawsuit, and the newly filed lawsuit focused on property taxes, really kind of come back to this piece of the state not providing enough money in the views of us and folks bringing these lawsuits for public education, and then really leaving the burden on local property taxpayers, local school districts to make really difficult decisions about how to raise that money with limited resources and only largely local property taxes as a vehicle to raise that extra revenue. And so one way that we kind of look at, kind of bring the focus back into New Hampshire, one of the ways that we compare, and we know that there are different amounts of money being raised, different raising capacity around the state, is by something called the equalized value per pupil. Some of you are more familiar with this than me, and been working on this for some of you decades. So I hope I do this explanation justice. But this is a really helpful tool for understanding, comparing communities across the state. I saw some people here who are running for seats that have Newport in your district and Croydon, and some in Salem, right? Salem's a very different community than maybe a smaller town like Newport, right? And so how do we kind of compare those communities so we can talk about them in an equalized way? And this is how we do this. And so at its most simple, equalized value per pupil is the amount of property available that a town can levy a property tax on to raise money for education. So it really helps us kind of like understand the revenue generating power or potential of a community by how much their property is valued at and how many students they have. So for a really specific kind of example here to break it down, is these two hypothetical communities. So in one, the property value, the equalized property value, say, is $1 million. And if they need to raise $10,000, sometimes the example we give is for some textbooks or new tablets for a classroom. That's a cost that, if Salem's buying that, or Newport, to stick with those examples, those textbooks are probably going to cost about the same. And so if you need to raise $10,000 to buy those textbooks, the community that has $1 million equalized value, their school tax rate can be $10 per thousand. The simple math is that's $10,000. They now can get those textbooks. With that same tax rate, the other community with only $400,000 in property value only raises $4,000. To raise that same $10,000, they need to have a tax rate 2.5 times that of the other community. So now you have a community with lower property values imposing a higher property tax rate and getting the same amount of funding. So to bring this kind of more into a real life examples, here are some communities across New Hampshire. This is, despite my best attempts, there are a number of charts in here and some that have a lot of values on them. So I'll take a second and walk through this, and always happy to answer more questions. We'll be sending this out after as well. But what this shows is the, different communities and kind of the range of property values and equalized value per pupil that we have here in New Hampshire. So all the way up at the top, for example, Moulton Borough has equalized value per pupil of almost $9 million. That means with a school tax rate of a little over $3.50, they can raise more than $30,000 per pupil. On the other end of the spectrum, say the community, since I'm picking on Newport, down at Newport, right? They have a equalized value of $650,000. So they have a tax rate 5 times as much as Moulton Borough, and they raise 1/3 the amount of money. So you have this kind of like double whammy of higher tax rates that squeeze out less money because they have to rely on those property values, which largely are driven by natural resources, access to a coast, a lake, if your town's next to a ski mountain, and sometimes if you're bordering, another state, like sometimes down on the border with Massachusetts, because you have access to some of that money from the Boston area. And if you multiply, this is the amount of money per pupil, right? And if you multiply that by a classroom of 20, right, then you look at the difference of like $200,000 between one classroom, for example, in Samerton, and a classroom in Newport, 20 students there, it's $180,000 difference just in one classroom for 1 year, the amount of money they're able to raise. An even more specific example, these are some of the towns in the Pemmy Baker Cooperative School District, which one of the plaintiffs in the new lawsuit is from. And this really helps highlight the kind of essence of that lawsuit and of this issue. And so here you have Plymouth, that with an equalized value of just under $1 million, has a combined tax rate of about $13.69. And so to put that in a dollar amount, that's about a $4,000 property tax bill per year. Someone living in Waterville Valley, sending their students to the same exact high school for the same exact education, same exact opportunities, is paying a quarter of the amount in their actual property tax bill for their education property tax. And so you can just kind of see these disparities going to a regional school district, really dramatically different impact in the amount of money people are paying in the property tax bills. And so one of the questions is, okay, well, how many students, how many families does this actually affect? How many have below average property values so that this system actually does not work for them? And the answer is a lot. It's almost 80% of students attend schools with below average tax bases. So again, that's those below average equalized value per pupil. So by definition, disadvantaged by the system, and those communities need to work a little bit harder, tax a little bit more, and get even less money out of it. And so this is an important piece also for a forum like this, where there are folks running in Democratic primaries and Republican primaries. That's 79% of students. That covers every single political spectrum in the state. That covers towns that are currently represented by Democrats, currently represented by Republicans, that flip each year, that stay solidly one or the other, that voted for both Governor Sununu and Democratic legislators, for example. I mean, this covers every single political type of town in the state. And this is not kind of an issue that only impacts specific communities. It's completely widespread. And it's really important to kind of hit that home, is that once people understand this issue and understand kind of the widespread nature of it, they really want action. They want action from the legislators. They want action from the folks representing them, especially at the state level. So one thing that we worked to do was, with this poll I mentioned, was try to understand what type of information does it take to get voters to kind of like connect these dots and understand that the state does not provide enough funding for how much it actually costs to educate students. And that lack of funding is causing my property tax bills to be as high as they are. It's a driving force in that. So here you can see the amount of state funding actually sent to communities. And it averaged, for fiscal year 21, it averaged a little under $4,600 per student. Communities and districts actually spent a little over $19,000 per student. And that gap is largely made up by local property taxes, which again, depending on the amount of property value you have very different tax rates and the ability to actually raise that money in an equitable way. And so one piece we did was, okay, what happens if you actually tried to make a school budget based off of what the state says is that adequacy figure, that $4,600 per student on average? Can you actually do it? And so a few years ago, we asked Pittsfield to do just that. Take your current school budget of about $10 million, but cut it back to the $2.7 million that would be if you only spent the state's adequacy number. And it was kind of an exercise in the absurd. They went through and just slashed stuff. And you can see all of the things that they eliminated to try to get to this hypothetical budget. What if we only spent the amount of money the state sent and said was enough for an adequate education? And this is just the first page. Paraprofessionals, all field trips gone, all insurance and other benefits. There's a third page, all transportation, guidance personnel, maintenance of the athletic fields. And you can see that what we're left with in this hypothetical exercise is, well, first, they didn't even get down to the number. We asked them to maintain those core classrooms and teachers, and they had to cut it by half. And that meant just cutting half the teachers. And you get to a point where you have 60 students per teacher with everything on those previous 3 pages eliminated. Many of those eliminations, by the way, would have completely violated collective bargaining agreements and state and federal laws. So even in a hypothetical world, you can't do that. But just an exercise to show kind of how little the state funding actually is, and also to show that just because the amount of money being spent per district is upwards of 19,000, that's not fluff, right? That is a lot of essential and oftentimes legally required things to provide adequate, above adequate education for our students. That's the money that helps our students succeed, that helps us have such good public education systems. And so there's this really kind of tension of spending that money that is necessary, that we need to spend and invest in our students, but not receiving the amount of money from the state that is actually required to educate our students. So I'm wrapping up here. So the last kind of piece that I want to hit on is, so what do voters think about this? What do people around the state feel about this, and what do they want done? And so we found that this stat, the amount of money sent by the state for adequate education and the amount actually spent by local school districts, and that gap there was one of the most compelling things that really resonated with folks. And they're like, okay, I get that. If you just told me $4,700, a lot of people don't know how much it actually costs. You explain that gap, and it really reinforces that who needs to be making these changes at the state level. So when presented with that gap, there was a 15% swing of people who originally had said, no, I think the state provides enough. And then you tell them to actually that gap, and they say, okay, never mind. The state needs to really put up more. And this is, both encouraging that people live this issue, they understand it in maybe some of the ways, or maybe the entire package of the system. But you put a few of those pieces together, and they start to see, oh, here's why my property bill is higher. I didn't understand why my neighbors who go to the same exact high school pay, a quarter as much, but now I get it. And so, and they want, change to happen. They want pieces of, they want legislation. They want this to be a priority. And this was also kind of across the board, regardless of a number of different demographic breakdowns. So you can see here that across party lines, there was still a majority of support for changing to a statewide funding source. You can see that across income lines, there is still a huge majority of support. And to me, the most interesting piece here is in this hypothetical, we're on the phone, well, not we, but the professional firm we contracted with to do this polling was on the phone, and they asked this question, and they said, okay, so say we change to a statewide funding source and you're going to pay more in taxes. Do you still support doing this? And that was the only group that was basically split in whether or not they want to continue doing that. And so to me, that's a really huge showing of support for across party lines, income lines, and people who even think in this hypothetical that they might pay more in taxes. There's still a ton of support, 46%, for changing to a statewide funding source. So to kind of wrap up here, I want to bring us back to really the core issue, which is 71% of revenue for our school districts is raised by local property taxes, which we now know are wildly not uniform across the state, and hit communities that have lower property values even harder, who have to work harder for less money. And this really is the crux of the issue. And what it results in is, more or less, from a student perspective, a pretty random outcome. If you happen to be born or you happen to live in a town with access to a lake, seacoast, ski mountain, right? Or if you can afford to move into one of those areas, right? Then you have very different educational opportunities and much lower property taxes. And that's a pretty inequitable system, and not something that anyone wants once they understand it, and really is harming our students in a lot of ways. And again, to kind of end on a more positive note, despite that, we do have really good schools in New Hampshire. We rank well in a lot of ways. Like our teachers, our students, a lot of our professionals in the education space are doing an amazing job and continue to every day. And so part of what we want is make sure that they have the resources they can to succeed, and that taxpayers are not picking up the burden in an unsustainable way. So I'm going to end with that and kick it over to Mackenzie. And again, as you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. And I'll turn the floor over to Moms Rising.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach, for presenting on what could be a really, really tough topic to understand, but you present it in a way that's really digestible. And I think you make the case that, and Moms Rising would tend to agree that New Hampshire, we need a more equitable system where we are doing every kid justice so that we can set them up for lifelong success. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing a great job. So let's just make sure everything look okay on your end, you guys. Perfect. All right. So one of the things that Moms Rising, we kind of live off of, is meeting moms where they're at. So I'd like to take a chance to introduce myself and my partner, Nancy, about why we do the work and why we're passionate. And I'd love to hear from you all too, about why you're running for office, what's important to you, what brings you here tonight. So if you want to put that in the chat, I'd love to read those at the end. But like I mentioned earlier, my name is Mackenzie Nicholson. I'm the Senior Director for Moms Rising in New Hampshire. You can see my picture of my family on the screen there on the left. I have 2 young kids. My daughter Quinn is just going into kindergarten this year. So we've been, living the life of COVID with childcare and school, and trying to balance work and family for the last 9 years now. And before I came to Moms Rising as someone who worked here, I was actually a volunteer for the organization for quite a few years, because I was a young mom and didn't have access to a lot of support, and really needed help. And Moms Rising helped me find my voice and learn about advocacy in ways that I could change New Hampshire and our country for the better, so that families have a chance at success. And I'll kick it over to you, Nance.
Hey everyone, my name's Nancy Glenn. So my picture of my family is on the right side of your screen. I have a 10-year-old named Hunter, and I also have my husband in Sutton, New Hampshire. So we are a family here in New Hampshire as well. What inspired me to become a part of Moms Rising is I was a volunteer. I was somebody that an organizer in New Hampshire reached out to me, and I fell in love with the values that Moms Rising had. And the different kinds of issues that they were working on truly affected my family. And I recognized how it affected other families in New Hampshire. And from taking that, I was able to, find that fire in my belly that I'm sure you all have as well right now, to be able to go out and put yourselves out there as a candidate right now, because I know that's not an easy job to do. And that's what really inspired me. I didn't have access to paid family medical leave. I had problems with being able to access childcare. And I noticed that, a lot of families in New Hampshire were essentially set up to fail. And it made it a point for me to make sure that I used my voice to go out and lift others up, and also to make sure that, folks that are elected into office are aware of the issues that we're facing too.
Well said. I forgot to mention that I live in Nottingham. So Nancy and I are a bit far apart, but we cover two different areas of the state. So yeah, I think that makes us a great team. So to learn a little bit more about Moms Rising, sorry, we'll go through here. So Moms Rising, like I mentioned before, we're meeting moms where we're at. We're an on-the-ground and an online grassroots organization of more than 1 million members. We're all working to increase family economic security, decrease discrimination against women and moms, and building a nation where businesses and families can thrive. We were established in 2006, and we have, like I said, more than 1 million members who are organizing and speaking out to improve public policy and to change the national dialogue on issues that are critically important to America's families, like what Nancy mentioned about having access to paid family leave. That's one of the things we work on and one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. Also, high quality childcare and early learning, something that the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project covered a little bit, one spectrum of the side of that, but we're going to be talking a little bit tonight about early care and education. We also work on ending the wage and hiring discrimination, which penalizes women, particularly moms and women of color. We're working on criminal justice reform, immigration policy reform, and gun safety, among other things. We advocate for access to healthy food for all kids, healthcare for all, earned sick days, breastfeeding rights, so that children can all have a healthy start, which seems to be a theme tonight. And I think it's a good theme for a Tuesday night. So let's talk about paid leave. What is paid leave and what do we want? We're going to watch this video real quick.
Holly had her baby 10 days ago. She's because she can't afford time off. Holly is worried about her baby and her ability to keep breastfeeding. Mateo's mom, Sheila, has cancer, but Mateo doesn't have paid family and medical leave available to help her. Tanya owns a pizza shop. She wants to offer paid leave, but it's too expensive for her small business to fund on its own. She wishes there was a level playing field so she could compete with bigger businesses. Holly, Mateo, and Tanya aren't alone. The United States is one of the only countries in the world with absolutely no paid family leave. The current Family and Medical Leave Act falls short. Only about 60% of working people can use it to take unpaid job-protected leave, but it doesn't help businesses, and many can't afford the unpaid time away. The good news is that there is a solution: paid family and medical leave that is accessible to all working people, not just new parents. Offers a meaningful length of leave, at least 12 weeks. Is affordable for all workers, businesses, and the government. Is broad and inclusive of all families, and offers full job protection. This would help lift businesses and boost economic security, lower infant mortality, increase breastfeeding rates, and boost the long-term health of mother and child. Help close the wage gap between men and women, and boost business bottom lines. It covers employees' pay while they are out, reduces turnover, increases productivity, profitability, performance, and employee morale. Paid family and medical leave insurance is a win-win-win. But watch out. Solutions that only cover new parents increase chances that employers will discriminate against moms and leave millions of families behind. Families like Mateo's, who need time to care for a parent who is ill. Care is care is care. Being there for family is what matters. You shouldn't have to give up a paycheck to do it. Join us, and let's make sure no one is left behind when we fight for paid family and medical leave.
Just love that video. So what is paid leave? So I think that video gave a pretty good overview of what we're talking about when we're talking about paid family leave. But essentially, paid family and medical leave is an employee benefit offering partial or full wage replacement to an employee taking temporary leave from work to tend to his or her own serious health condition, or to that of a family member, or to leave for the care of a new child in the home through birth, adoption, or foster care. Typically, medical leave is taken for one's own health, including pregnancy, while family leave includes caring for a seriously ill family member or caring for a newborn child joining the family through adoption or foster care. Giving birth can include both medical and family or parental leave. Usually, family and medical leave ranges from at least 1 week to a few months, and paid sick leave can differ in the amount of time, but differ in the fact that the former requires little to no advance notice and tends to be shorter periods away from work. So I want to talk a little bit about what the situation here is in New Hampshire. So in New Hampshire, who has it, paid family leave, who takes it? So this was a study conducted by the Carsey School at UNH back in 2016. I know that it is a little outdated, 6 years or so now, but I think some of the statistics here still ring true. So I won't read them. Take a look. But you'll see that, access to paid family leave isn't great. Only about a third of New Hampshire workers have jobs that have access to extended paid leave. And I think the problem here, right, is that nearly every worker encounters the need to take time away from their job because of illness or injury, to welcome a new child, or to care for an ill family member. One of the things that we saw more recently that paid family leave probably would have been great if a lot more people had access to it was the pandemic, which highlighted the need and difficulties for workers that they were already facing, trying to balance work and care and family. Everyone benefits when workers are able to balance job obligations and family needs, and giving workers financial security by allowing them to take paid leave to deal with the child's illness or a parent's recovery from an illness would be great, but it increases, like what that video said before, increases morale, productivity, retention. So not just benefits a person, but it benefits us all. You may have heard that New Hampshire has a new paid family leave plan starting kind of soon. So the Granite State Paid Family and Medical Leave Plan that was created by Governor Sununu as a part of his budget in 2021 will be fully in effect and live on January 1st of 2023. The plan provides qualifying workers with 60% of their average weekly wage for up to 6 weeks per year. Under the plan, qualifying workers can take time off for the birth of a child or to care for a newborn, an adopted baby, or child. They can also get time off to care for a family member with a serious health condition. The state's 11,000 member workforce automatically qualifies for the benefits. Businesses that participate in the program and pay for the employee premiums can deduct 50% of the amount they paid from their business enterprise taxes. Others can privately buy with a $5 capped weekly cost. Funding for the program will come from the state's general fund and a stabilization trust fund. So one of the things that MomsRising will be working on over the next few years is growing this program and making it the best version of itself that it can possibly be. Unfortunately, the design of this program looks unlikely to help the workers who are least likely to have access to parental, medical, or family caregiving leave already available through their employers, because employers of hourly and low income work that already don't provide this paid leave aren't more likely to do so via the state program. 6 weeks is really not a lot of time. And plus a 60% wage replacement among other program details make lower income workers less likely to benefit than they would maybe in other states where the average wage replacement and the time given tend to be a little bit higher. So MomsRising will be working to make, like I said, this plan a little bit better. We need a better balanced risk pool, both low and high risk, for a more sustainable program. Since this program isn't live yet, we don't fully know what that will look like. But we need a more comprehensive program that's accessible and equitable and adequate for all people in New Hampshire. We are worried that the coverage won't be enough here. We're worried that the cost of this program might be more than we expect. And so we're kind of going to play a wait and see game right now to see how it goes. But we definitely think we can improve upon this plan and make it better for all families here in New Hampshire. And you can see some of our great advocates at the State House with their signs. So I wanted to talk a little bit about paid leave and some polling that we've done on paid leave. Let me just pull this up really quickly. So Build Back Better, which was the legislative framework proposed by President Biden, which aimed to make a large nationwide public investment in social, infrastructural, and environmental programs of our time. It included universal pre-K, free community college, lower drug costs, expanded child tax credits, capped childcare costs, a whole bunch of stuff. It also had 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. And while Build Back Better isn't on the table anymore, we did do some research and polling around the paid family leave provisions of Build Back Better that are interesting. They are nationwide polls, but I believe they translate to New Hampshire. So I think it's notable that 7 in 10 Americans think that creating a universal paid family and medical leave program was a good reason to pass Build Back Better. 43% thought it was a really good reason. In that same poll, nearly 3/4 of people, or 73%, supported federal funding for paid family and medical leave. Another recent poll, not that same one, but about half of the respondents said that caregiving for children and family members is very important to families' economic security. And another 50% said that caregiving for children and family members is very important to a thriving economy. Lastly, nearly 2 in 3 voters say that it's important to address providing paid family and medical leave. 64% say that it's important, 39% say it's very important, while only 1 in 3 voters say it's not important at all. So again, even though these were like nationwide polling results, I think they translate. People need paid family leave to thrive. Their families need paid family leave to thrive. Again, just a different way to sort of visualize this, basically saying that support for paid leave remains really strong. 3 in 4 voters support a national paid leave program, while some more strongly support it. And it breaks it down sort of here by political party, along with the ideas that go behind, how paid leave can support families, businesses. One thing that I think is really interesting is a lot of people agree, 63% agree that paid leave should be a part of a government spending. So thinking about that in terms of New Hampshire. But this is all a part of like a larger package. So we're going to talk about early care and education next and how that sort of supports families. We have another fun video.
Childcare. It's vital for our kids and a lifeline for parents. Whether they choose center-based care, smaller family-based childcare, or care from a trusted friend or neighbor. But did you know that childcare is also great for our economy? After all, kids need to be taken care of so moms and dads can work. That was true before COVID, but the pandemic has really driven the point home. And yet, the costs of childcare are soaring. Now, childcare is often more expensive than college. That's causing a massive financial strain on working parents. But childcare providers of all kinds are also struggling financially, despite providing an essential service. Childcare centers are burdened by increased COVID costs, rising insurance costs, rent hikes, and utility increases. They often can't afford to pay their workers a livable wage. Home-based providers and trusted friends and family caregivers are struggling as well. Wouldn't it be better if parents paid a reasonable amount of their income for childcare? And if childcare centers could afford to truly pay their staff for the high-quality care they give, the care we know all children deserve. And if we could ensure that hardworking providers and friend and family caregivers make a livable living wage. To do this, we need investment. Childcare is a public good, and investment in childcare as a public good is something we can all get behind. Support us in our effort to get better, more affordable childcare for working families.
One of the lines I really like from that video is childcare is a public good, which I think is something that takes a little bit of a mind shift, because I think a lot of times we think about childcare as like a business transaction, but it should be viewed as a public good, right? Families need childcare to work and to be engaged with their work, which is why it's one of our larger priorities that we'll be working on here in New Hampshire.
Childcare.
Stop that. All right, let's see. So to talk a little bit about what Moms Rising, our vision for early care and education. Basically, we're committed to family economic security, ending discrimination against women and mothers, and building a nation where both businesses and families can thrive. This is something we talked about earlier, but we want to work to increase access to affordable, high quality early care and education opportunity for children birth through age 5. We work to mobilize and partner with families to embed voices, needs, and perspectives of families in the work to ensure that all children have access to early learning opportunities. We believe that all children deserve access to affordable, high-quality early learning opportunities to be ready and successful for school and life, regardless of race, zip code, identity, ability, or any other factor. And we define high quality as early learning policies, programs, and services that recognizes and honor the important role of self-defined families in the lives of children, focus on the whole child with specific attention to social emotional development, honor and support home culture and language, provide for a diverse, well-trained, and fairly compensated workforce that reflect the children and families they serve, and supports a positive and consistent interactions between caregivers and children, authentically engages with partners and families, and meets each family where they're at. So, among other things, we are doing really well in New Hampshire, but we have seen some gaps recently. And, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated some existing issues that we were seeing here in New Hampshire. So we wanted to share a little bit with you about what we're hearing from parents and providers. So to talk a little bit about this, I'm going to kick it over to you, Nancy.
So this is my special and favorite part about being a part of MomsRising. So one of the best things I get to do is I get to go out and I get to talk with families. I get to talk with, obviously providers, business owners, as well as, grandparents, the whole spectrum, and also kids as well. So one of the things that we're hearing most commonly in regards to childcare in New Hampshire, we have some quotes from some folks in New Hampshire right now on your screen. I'm not going to read them to you, but I'll tell you what we're looking for. Affordability, that's probably one of the biggest ones right now that we're hearing. Accessibility. All right. We have a lot of towns in New Hampshire that are childcare, like we have childcare deserts in New Hampshire, where even if there's a family that has access to a subsidy to be able to help them be able to access affordable childcare, they cannot find a place to be able to bring their child. The wait lists right now are astronomical. And because of a lot of different elements of wages and things like that, a lot of providers are having issues being able to attract and retain workforce, which basically tells us that if we cannot help to fund the workforce truly behind the workforce, then we're going to see a lot of a domino effect that's going to hit our economy in New Hampshire as well, which is one of the reasons why we need to really look at childcare reform on a high level as well. Do you want to switch to the next slide? And again, as I had just said with providers, I want to say that it's a huge struggle right now for providers to be able to stay open. We're hearing about childcare centers closing down, and a lot of that pressure is being put on other childcare centers in our state to be able to pick up some of the children that are losing care right now. We're hearing about families having to drop out of the workforce simply because they can whether not afford it or they can't find the care that they need for their children. So, and this isn't just an early ed. We're also looking at after school care too, which is another piece of the puzzle that we have to look at when we think of childcare. It's not just early ed, but it's also later on in life as well. I know that after school care can also be extremely expensive for a lot of families, which makes it impossible for them to be able to work a normal 9 to 5. Back to you, Mackenzie.
Thank you. Yeah, so just again on voters thinking about early care and education, I just wanted to tell you, why do the people in New Hampshire care about this? And this poll that we did, this is some research we did around reconciliation, which is essentially a way for Congress to enact legislation on taxes, spending, debt limit. We were looking at a reconciliation package federally recently that included ways of addressing the high cost of living for families, that had prescription drug costs included, clean energy, and making childcare more affordable. And you can see from this pie chart that folks really overwhelmingly wanted childcare as a part of that package for the reasons that Nancy said, right? In New Hampshire, we're experiencing really high costs for families and for providers. The cost of care is just a lot. We're in a 46% of families in New Hampshire live in a childcare desert, meaning that there are no available slots for them. So when we're talking about getting families to work and helping our economy, they need to be able to send their kids to a place that they know is going to be safe and beneficial for their kids. And right now we don't have a good infrastructure for them to do that. We will be working on that, and hopefully we can partner with you all to help make some of that changes help make some of those changes happen.
All right, so moms are changing more than diapers. All right, one of the biggest things with Moms Rising is, we take on the most critical issues that are facing women, mothers, and families. We do this by educating the public and mobilizing grassroots actions to be able to bring the voices and real life experiences of women and mothers straight to our local, state, and nation's leaders. So we're looking at you guys because we're going to be coming for you. We amplify women's voices and policy issues in the national dialogue and in the media across all platforms. So we work in print, radio, blogs, social media, and so much more. We accelerate grassroots impact on Capitol Hill, as well as at state capitals across the country. And we hold corporations accountable for fair treatment of women and mothers and for ensuring the safety of their products. Another big piece of what Moms Rising does is we truly meet parents and families where they are, which means we help to eliminate those barriers for them to be able to truly access, policymakers and being able to share their stories. Because truth be told, we are all experts in our own experiences. If you don't experience some of these things, then, we're not expecting you to be an expert. So we're hoping that, you guys will reach out to our organization and reach out to other families to be able to truly hear what they have to share and what kinds of experiences they're having. So you can truly make, your elected position a really impactful one, for New Hampshire families, whether it is in regards to paid family leave, childcare, in regards to maternal health, also in regards to education, as well as, we're talking about school funding as well here on this call to be able to help with families. All of these things come together and we need all of it. It's not just one slice of the pie, it's the whole pie that we need. And we need all of that to be able to help make sure that New Hampshire families go further and they can be the best that they can be, and that New Hampshire can be the best state for families to be living in. It's one of the reasons why I like to stay here, is because I have hope that we'll be able to see all of these things and be able to watch more families thrive. I think we're just about at time.
Yeah, so well said. Thank you, Nancy. That's it for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Mackenzie, Nancy, and Zach. I'm going to go ahead and take over and begin Q&A. So our policy analyst, Carly, and I have been keeping an eye on the chat and keeping a running document of all the great questions that have been asked throughout the presentations. As you continue to have questions, please put them in the chat and we will keep an eye on them and make sure they get asked. If any questions don't get asked here in the next 30 minutes, I will be sure to send them around to all of the panelists and email folks responses. So the first one, since Moms Rising just dropped up, I'm going to go ahead and direct this one towards you while it's front of mind. Jason Bourne asked, and Jason, I'm paraphrasing this a bit, so if I get it wrong, just let me know. Is there any data on the potential economic benefit of funded early care and childcare? We know that businesses and families would benefit, but are there any other economic impacts that show the payoff in investing in this?
There's definitely a lot of research that talks about the return on investment for early care and education. And I'm sure, Zach, that you could chime in here too. I would say the earlier, the better, the higher quality, the better, right? That lifelong achievement, the poverty reduction measures, the outcomes. I'm happy to follow up with you, Jason, and I can send you some research about it. I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, plus it's getting a little late in the day, so my brain is foggy, but I can follow up with you.
And just to piggyback a little bit onto that too, I don't necessarily have any numbers either. However, we also have to think about, the disability community and children that experience different abilities as well. When you think about it from that realm of things, the earlier that you get in there, the more likelihood of being able to identify needs that a child might have. And that's another piece of data that, is floating around somewhere in New Hampshire too, in regards to the age range of when a child might be identified, with a disability, and how we're going to be able to go in and do the right supports and services that child needs. The sooner that we get in, the better the outcome we'll see in the future, which is another piece of the puzzle that Moms Rising has worked on as well, which is early intervention services too.
Great, thank you, Nancy. For Zach, I have a question from Bobby Bodman. They are running for representative in Carroll County District 7. This is a little bit broad, but in 2018, we lost about $100 million in SWEPT, and Bobby is asking, where does that put us? Zach, maybe you can talk a little bit about where we are currently with SWEPT and kind of what there is to be desired.
Yeah, so I hope I answered this question. If not, throw it in the chat and I can follow up. But in the most recently passed budget, which was passed about a year ago, there was a reduction in this amount of SWEPT. So the amount of money raised by SWEPT, which is a statewide education property tax, is a dollar amount that then the tax rate is adjusted each year to get that dollar amount. I think it's $363 million a year. And so depending on the value of properties around the state, the legislature adjusts the amount to raise exactly that much money. The budget last year, budget writers had some surplus revenue, and they decided to cut SWEPT by $100 million. So effectively only raising $263 million for the year, and in theory, providing a tax cut to every property owner in the state. The problem with that move was that it was paired with the elimination of what was called fiscal capacity disparity aid, which was targeted aid towards communities with less property wealth. And in anticipation of a question like this, I was bringing up a few things. And so in general, that combination of reducing SWEPT and eliminating the fiscal capacity disparity aid did not help communities that need it most. Only 4.5% of that $100 million reduction actually benefited the 20 poorest communities in the state because they lost so much funding from the fiscal capacity disparity aid. So in theory, it was a $100 million one-time tax cut across the board. It was not targeted, and it did not end up impacting the communities that actually needed it most. Whereas taking that $100 million and putting it in a more targeted way, like bolstering the existing fiscal capacity disparity aid, would have been a more kind of targeted way of using those funds. I hope that was helpful. SWEPT can get a little confusing, and I'm happy to kind of provide more information on that as well if folks need it.
Great, thank you, Zach. Next up for Moms Rising, this question, oh, I just lost it. I think it's part of the reason that paid family medical leave is pretty divisive, and I think is on a lot of people's minds, but it can be a little tricky to answer. How many people who live here but work in Massachusetts would benefit from paid family medical leave? Is that a concern?
Is it a concern? Absolutely. I actually have many member stories of, families that have that have chronic health conditions that purposefully work in Massachusetts for the paid family medical leave program that is there. And this is an English, she's a English as a second language teacher. This is somebody that we could utilize. She has multiple master's degrees, that could be doing some of her work here in New Hampshire, but she chooses to cross state lines in order to be able to access a paid family leave policy. Do I have the data for that? I don't know if the data out there truly exists in regards to exactly what those numbers are. Mackenzie, are you familiar with any, or Zach?
Yeah, well, I can just say, like, in typical New Hampshire fashion, we tend to be the last state to enact a progressive policy like this that tends to keep younger working families in the state. We are constantly up against this wall where we're losing. So not only is this an issue for people living here and then working in Massachusetts, but also when we talk about needing to keep young people in the state. Why? Because it's good for our economy, right? It's good for our culture. It's good for lots of things. We're losing them to states that have, like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, who have paid family leave programs. Like I said, we do have a paid family leave program, but right now it's not equitable or accessible to people here working in New Hampshire unless you're a state employee. And we're not even sure really what those benefits look like yet. And if that pool of benefits is going to be enough to carry the people who need to take it. So yeah, I think it is an issue.
And one other thing I'll add to that is relative to retaining and attracting younger workers and families in the state. is on that poll that we asked how important education funding was as a state priority for state level government. Of those that said very important, the highest group by far was folks aged 18 to 34, and 80% of them said that it was highly important. And that goes into a lot of other indicators for making the state feel welcoming and actually be welcoming from a financial and family perspective for younger workers in the workforce.
Just gonna quickly add, that's one of the pros and cons of New England, right? Like, we love being able to be so close proximity to all these other states around us. However, when New Hampshire falls short around the states around us in regards to different policy changes that could truly affect families and other granite staters, it means we're going to lose. We're going to end up losing in the end, because we're going to lose our workforce to other states and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you, all three of you. Zach, I have a question for you. So Will Thomas is asking about potential sources of revenue that might replace New Hampshire's reliance on the property tax to fund our public schools. And do you have any ideas on how best to combat those who might resist, for example, a progressive income tax?
So this is one of the things that is, in my opinion, why this is still an issue, is talking about taxes is deeply antithetical to why some people think they live in New Hampshire. And I hope that that property tax slide I showed shows that we just generally are good at hiding our taxes and in a way that is not equitable. So I want to start out by saying that I understand conversations around different or new tax structures are really challenging and have a history in the state of not being welcome politically. That being said, we don't have a magic solution. There are a lot of different ways we could go about that. When SWEPT was a true statewide education property tax, there were a number of communities that put more into that than they got back, and they felt that that wasn't fair. Someone mentioned that in the chat, and that resulted in this current system we have where towns can keep that excess funding. Those communities, one of the arguments they made was that just because on average Moulton Borough has really high property values does not mean everyone in Moulton Borough can afford higher taxes, which is fair. That's a fair argument. And so there are ways to structure revenues and taxes that help take into account people's ability to pay. For example, putting exemptions on a property tax. So say you don't pay your property tax for the first $200,000 of the value of your home. So that means that someone who owns a home that's $250,000 is only paying taxes on $50,000. And someone who owns $1 million home is paying taxes on $800,000. So that's one way that you could start to get at taking into account people's ability to pay. Obviously, other states do income and sales taxes, and we don't in New Hampshire. That works well for some states, doesn't work as well for others. There's a ton of arguments on either side. But I think going back to what are some ways that we have a perfectly regressive tax structure here in New Hampshire. And so taking that into account and trying to identify how we can structure it in a way so people who have more means can pay more and afford it without harming those that are on fixed incomes, that are senior citizens, that have been living in a community for a long time. So it's a long way of saying it's really complicated, but there are ways to do it. And it starts with an understanding and an acknowledgement of how deep this issue is and how many people it's currently harming, and working towards a solution that does not continue to disadvantage people that already don't have a lot of financial means.
Great, thank you, Zach. A question for Mackenzie and Nancy. Can you explain a little bit more about how people leaving the workforce for 3 months on paid leave is a benefit to businesses?
Definitely. Nancy, I mean, I could answer this, but I'm sure you have a story that you could tie this into. If not, I can.
You start and then I'll hop in.
Yeah. So I know from personal experience, when you need to take time off to care for a loved one, to take care of a newborn baby, if you don't have access to paid family leave, how do you feel? You feel stressed. You feel like the world is against you. So are you able to stay engaged in your work? Do you feel like you want to continue to work for that employer or to continue to work at all? if you don't feel supported? And I think the answer is likely no. If we want to keep a young workforce here in New Hampshire, we need to offer policies that allow them to lead both lives, professionally and personally, and to be people in their families, right? A couple of years back, my mom had a stroke, and while I was 5 months pregnant, mind you, so this was at a time when I was volunteering for Moms Rising. I didn't have access to paid family leave, even though I worked for an organization that advocated for it. I used up a lot of my vacation and sick time to take care of my mom while she recovered from her stroke. And then when it came time to having my daughter Quinn, I had no leave. I had no paternity and maternity leave. I didn't feel supported. It sort of makes it feel like the world is against you. And, you know, did I want to continue to work for that employer? Maybe not. I loved the work, so I did. But that's all to say that the stress that we put on families, for them to go and lead their lives as humans is kind of silly, right? Like we all experience what I said earlier, we all experience things in our lives where we need to take time away to lead our lives. So I think offering benefits like that can let your employees feel like they're a part of something, let them feel supported so that they can be engaged in the work and do the work that they need to do while not worrying about financial ruin if something's to happen to a family member, or if they get pregnant, or they need to, you know, take time off for their own mental health.
So just to add a little bit more onto that, I think we also have to remember, when did our morals shift so much to the point where we didn't put family above all? I think majority of the folks here, you know, would mostly put their family in front of everything that they would like to do. But if you have a job that's helping to pay for your home, your food, everything, the basic necessities in life, you know, you kind of get stuck with having to choose between one or the other. So very similarly to a story that Mackenzie had shared, I worked for a business, I won't say where, and I didn't have access to paid leave either. And so I have two sons. I have one who's with me and one who passed away. And my son who's with me, he was born 8 weeks early, 2 pounds when he was born, and he was in the NICU. You know, he had significant health issues that we had to overcome, you know, and when I was forced to go back to work early because I needed to pay for the diapers and things like that, and I was out of the workforce earlier than I was expecting, you know, I wasn't able to concentrate on my work. And then on the latter, when I had my son, who unfortunately passed away shortly after he was born, and I had to go back to work even sooner at that point, I couldn't focus. I was waitressing at the time. I was going up to tables and I was having meltdowns and crying. You know, is that really the type of employee that you want to have in front of you? And I didn't feel supported whatsoever by my employer either. You know, and at the end of the day, you know, we all preach family first, family first, family first, right? And unfortunately, you know, like it's not that way in America. And it's not that, and all the other industrialized countries in the world, it is. All right. So how does it benefit an employer? Absolutely, the morale within the building that you're working in, because they feel supported by their employer, as well as the employee is more likely to do a better job. They're more likely to be more innovative with the tasks that they're going to be working towards as well. Because when you're passionate about something and you're working and you're truly, truly passionate about that, you're going to see better results, you know, and the proof is there. There is data that actually does back that piece up.
Thanks, Nancy and Mackenzie. Zach, one more question for you. So I think a lot of folks are aware of kind of the thought that the legislature reduced property taxes via a swept cut by $100 million in last year's budget. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So I did hit that in the last answer about how there was that swept cut, but it was paired with also getting rid of the fiscal capacity disparity aid. So it really didn't end up helping property poorer communities.
Okay, I have another one for you. I've been chatting with Kathleen Fountain in the
Great.
chat. And Kathleen, let me know if I get this question if I get this right. So in regard to funds for education where 70% is paid through property taxes, if the portion by the state were to increase, reducing the property tax rate, would the state provide aid while restructuring that process?
So, I mean, the answer is yes, no, maybe, all of the above. I mean, the kind of like hypothetical, the amount of aid provided each year is written into law, right? So it's an amount that's determined by a formula that's written into law that's passed with the budget each year. And with that come a huge amount of how that's calculated, what strings are attached, what strings aren't attached, reporting requirements from the Department of Education, testing standards. Like there's a massive amount of pieces that go with that. And the funding is one small section of it. And so if they were to, increase funding, my guess is, right, there would also be a lot of conversations around the non-numbers policy side of it. So what type of support would there be? Would you need restructuring? Would you increase the amount that a student gets who needs special education services by a proportionate amount? Would that increase? What about English language learners? And so I guess the kind of short answer is it really depends on who's writing the budget. And that is largely dictated by the amount of public pressure and awareness on this issue and throughout the budget process here in Concord, so that legislators both feel pressured and supported to pursue these changes. And so it's kind of a super hypothetical, but I guess our to kind of talk about what we hope to see would be that in a context in which there's conversations around increasing funding, there's also deep conversations with all those other stakeholders. So the disability organizations to be involved to make sure that supports and services are there and that they're getting the adequate funding. We'll make sure that the school board association, the superintendent's association, all these stakeholders are involved. So you're not just throwing money, that you're really doing it in a strategic, smart, targeted way, but that you are increasing funding at the end of the day. So kind of a roundabout answer, really depends on kind of the legislative makeup and the amount of engagement at the State House throughout the process.
Got it. Thanks, Zach. I have, I think, one last question to close Moms Rising out from Jordan Applewhite, who's running in Grafton County for state rep. What kind of childcare policies should we be supporting on the state level?
Oh, I love this question. So some of the ways we could address the issues we're facing in New Hampshire right now could include some far-reaching programs to increase the compensation for childcare workers and subsidizing care to more families. But one of the things that we're actually working on right now, and Zach just mentioned, like the budget process in New Hampshire's currently going through a budget process where the department heads, write their budget, then it goes off to the governor, etc. Thank you all so much in advance. We are working to we're asking New Hampshire to invest in enrollment-based childcare scholarships rather than what we have right now, which is attendance-based childcare scholarships. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. So when you think of your average K-12 public school, if students are forced to stay home sick or because there's a family emergency, a teacher's pay or the overall budget of the school isn't affected because of that absence. Because school funding is based on enrollment, not day-to-day attendance. So school officials can keep the lights on, teachers can get paid, and the schools are running smoothly, even if some of the students aren't there. But for early educators in New Hampshire, it's the opposite. So right now, childcare centers are paid for families who receive childcare scholarships, which those are low-income working families based on attendance, for like only when a child shows up for care. If a childcare program has families that receive those childcare scholarships are absent for one reason or another, like getting sick during the COVID pandemic, they don't get reimbursed for those funds. So the uncertainty of whether you'll be paid for a student's absent days disincentivizes the acceptance of those childcare scholarships altogether, which exacerbates some existing childcare desert issues that we're facing, makes for unstable budgets, right? So childcare programs can't invest in quality. They never know when they're going to get paid. They maybe can't expand their businesses. They can't pay their teachers what they want. And if these sort of shortages happen for childcare centers enough, these closure, it can lead to childcare centers having to close, and that's not unheard of. Like what Nancy mentioned earlier, we're seeing huge deserts for childcare right now, and they're closing because they can't keep the lights on because they're not always getting paid. And families can't go to work without care, and childcare providers can't continue to operate in the red. So we've got to do something here. So we're currently working on asking the Department of Health and Human Services to include in their budget a way to fully fund the change to enrollment-based childcare scholarships, meaning that childcare centers will get paid whether the kids are there all the time or not. And I think it's a move in the right direction for families and for providers. So that's one thing that you may hear from us about when you are in Concord, and we hope that we'll have your support.
Another thing that y'all could help us with. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in through the chat about data. All right, New Hampshire is actually, we need more data. We really do. We need to have more studies. We need to have more things in there so we can give more of these statistics that I know that you all are so thirsty for to be able to use and to be able to run with. Right now, the lack of data, the only thing that we have to go off of for the most part is, what we're seeing and what we're hearing out in the world, and what we're hearing out in the grant state, what we're seeing from providers, from families, from grandparents, and so on and so forth. And business owners as well. So that's another piece that you might want to look into when you get into an elected position as well, is to be able to look into, what kind of ways could we do more in data collection, so then we can better understand the needs of families in our state in regards to a variety of different family-oriented policies that we could have.
Great, thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Zach to close this out. I just pasted in the chat a follow-up survey. This is the second candidate webinar that we've done so far this summer. We are still in the process of scheduling more, so your feedback is really important to us. If everybody could take a few minutes once this concludes to fill that out, we would all be really grateful. And I'm going to go ahead and paste Zach, Mackenzie's, and Nancy's contact information in the chat as well, if anybody has any additional questions and wants to reach out to them independently. So Zach, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you for doing a great job moderating again, Casey. This was smooth, and I think we got through a lot at the Q&A. I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank Moms Rising for partnering with us on this. I hope you all found this informative. And I just want to leave, and I'll let Nancy and Mackenzie add anything, but we are an open door. We are a nonpartisan organization. We really want to help all of you understand the issues that we work on. I know Moms Rising feels the same. And so please, if you have questions about anything we've covered or anything you think might be related, please reach out. We'll do our best to either let you know or send you to an organization or an expert that does know. The more all of you are educated about these issues, the better, hopefully, and the more efficient you'll be at lawmaking. And we want to be involved in that process and provide you with those stories, those testimonies, that data. And so just really appreciate all of you taking the time tonight. And Mackenzie and Nancy, if you have anything else to say, I want to give you the option before we close out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project for hosting these great series of informational webinars. I think New Hampshire is such a unique place. It's something that Nancy and I talk to our colleagues a lot about, that New Hampshire deserves special consideration when we're thinking about policy and families, because we are such a unique space. And I think I speak for both Nancy and I when I say that we're honored to get the chance to have a conversation with you all today. And I want to say thank you for running. Because New Hampshire has a citizen legislature, and we know that you are offering to take a job that you're not paid for. And just know, like what Zach said, we are not expecting you to be policy experts in every single arena that we're about to throw you into. You have allies, so you can always reach out to us at Moms Rising, and I know New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project as well. Please reach out to us. And like we said in the beginning of Moms Rising's presentation, is that we're meeting moms where we're at. Really, we advocate for anybody who has a mom or who has ever loved a mom or has a belly button. Please reach out to us, and we hope that we can work together and make New Hampshire the best place to work, live, and play.
Yeah, and thank you so much to the School Funding Fairness Project for sure. Zach, Casey, you guys have been awesome. I also wanted to throw out, if you have any questions for us, absolutely, we're here. You have a story for us, reach out to us. You're curious, reach out to us. All right. At the end of the day, I know that for us, it's all about relationships. It's all about building, a relationship with you folks as well as with other Granite Staters, to be able to truly get down to what we all need in our state. So if even if you just want to say, hey, you think we're cool people, then feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to chat with you, and we hope to be able to work with you all as well, once these election cycles get over, right? So hopefully, good luck to all of you, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And we did put the link to the survey in the chat. Mackenzie put the wrong, or sorry, Casey put the wrong one at first, but she put the right one in. Someone corrected it, and we will be sending that out in a follow-up email with the recording to this and the slide decks for both our organizations to you all and to everyone else that registered. So you have that. So we'll be following up with that in the next day or so. So thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate y'all taking the time tonight. Hope to see you soon.